The night it happened, Lorato felt the whole world shift under her feet. She was only 19, sitting quietly at the dinner table in their small home in Arusha, trying to avoid any trouble. But Mbwana, her stepdad, slammed his fork down and glared at her like she was dirt on the floor. Then he shouted in front of everyone, "You contribute nothing. Get out of my house." The words hit her like a slap. Before she could even speak, he stood up, grabbed her worn-out backpack from the corner, and tossed it at her. The zipper was already broken, and her school books spilled onto the floor. Her step-siblings laughed under their breath. Lorato looked at her mother, hoping, just hoping for one sign of love. But her mother just sat there, frozen, staring at her plate as if Lorato wasn't her child anymore. That silence hurt more than Mbwana's words. When the door slammed in her face, the night air felt colder than she expected. She stood outside barefoot, hugging her torn backpack, listening to the sound of the family dinner continuing without her. No one called her name. No one checked on her. A tear slid down her cheek, then another. She wasn't just being kicked out of a house. She was being kicked out of a life she thought she belonged to. But as she walked away from the door, something inside her shifted. She whispered to herself, shaky but determined, "This ends tonight. My story won't stay like this." And for the first time, she felt the spark of a new beginning. Lorato's walk through the dark streets brought back memories she had spent years trying to bury. It didn't start that night. Her stepdad Mbwana had treated her like she was unwanted from the moment she entered his house at age 12. She remembered the first day she arrived. Instead of welcoming her, he looked at her suitcase and said, "Don't bring problems into my home." She didn't understand what he meant back then, but she would soon learn. Her step-siblings, Kasai and Baraka, made everything worse. They treated her room like a store they could steal from. Her hair oil, her notebooks, even the little bracelet her real father had given her, things disappeared all the time. When she asked about it, they laughed and called her dramatic. They mocked her clothes too, calling them charity outfits, and asking her why she dressed like someone from the village. She pretended she didn't hear, but every word stuck to her like a bruise. At school, she tried to be invisible. At home, she couldn't disappear even if she wanted to. Mbwana made sure of that. He ordered her to wake up before everyone else to sweep the compound, wash the dishes, prepare breakfast, and iron uniforms. Not hers, theirs. If something wasn't done right, he would shout, "Can't you do anything properly? Even Kasai and Baraka are better than you." He never raised his voice at his own children, only at her. And her mother, she became a shadow. She followed whatever Mbwana said, always agreeing, always quiet. Sometimes Lorato would look at her mother and wonder if she even saw what was happening, or if she had trained herself not to see it at all. The painful part was how normal it all became. Lorato got used to eating last, wearing hand-me-downs, doing chores straight after school, and being blamed for every small thing that went wrong in the house. If the TV remote went missing, her fault. If dinner wasn't ready when Mbwana came home, her fault. If Kasai broke a plate, still her fault. But even through all of this, Lorato stayed silent. She told herself, just finish school, just keep the peace, just survive. She swallowed insults, held back tears, and convinced herself that one day things would be different. Yet deep down, she knew this wasn't a family. She was living in a place where she was tolerated, not loved. And on the night Mbwana threw her out, like she was trash, that silence inside her finally broke. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to say to herself that she deserved better. This time, she wasn't going to stay quiet. Lorato wandered through the streets of Arusha with no idea where she was going. Her eyes were red and swollen, and every step felt heavier than the last. Cars passed by, people walked past her, but no one looked twice. She felt invisible, like she didn't exist to anyone. The sound of her backpack dragging on the ground made her chest tighten. That bag held everything she owned, and even that was falling apart. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to stop crying, but the tears wouldn't listen. Every memory of Mbwana's shouting replayed in her head. Every moment of silence from her mother stung. She hugged herself, wishing she had somewhere to run, someone to call. Anyone. Then a black SUV slowed beside her. She didn't look up at first. She thought it was just someone asking for directions. But the car stopped completely. The door opened, and heels clicked on the pavement as a woman stepped out. "Lorato," the woman said softly, shocked. Lorato froze. Hardly anyone outside her family knew her name. The woman came closer and gently touched Lorato's arm. "My child, why are you out here alone at this hour?" Lorato blinked, confused. It took a moment for her to recognize the face. Warm eyes, the familiar shape of her smile. It was Aunt Naledi, her late father's cousin, someone she remembered only from a childhood wedding photo. "Hey, Aunt Naledi," Lorato whispered, her voice cracking. "Yes, it's me," Naledi replied. "What happened to you? You look scared." And that was all it took. Lorato broke down again, sobbing into her hands. Naledi didn't hesitate. She pulled her into a tight hug, shielding her like no one had done in years. "It's okay. You're safe now. You're coming with me." Lorato tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. He threw me out." Naledi's expression hardened, not with anger at Lorato, but at the family who had failed her. She took the torn backpack from Lorato's shoulder, placed it gently in the SUV, and guided the trembling girl into the back seat. As the door closed behind her, Lorato felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. She didn't know where they were going or what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking alone. Naledi looked at her through the rearview mirror and said softly, "Your father would never have allowed this." Hearing that brought a fresh wave of tears, but this time they carried a tiny spark of hope. Naledi's home felt like another world, quiet, warm, and safe. As soon as Lorato stepped inside, she felt the heaviness in her chest loosen just a little. Naledi wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, made her tea, and sat beside her on the couch. For a while, neither of them spoke. Lorato just stared at her hands, trying to understand how her life had fallen apart in one night. Finally, Naledi sighed and said softly, "Lorato, there is something you deserve to know. Something you should have known years ago." Lorato looked up slowly. Her heart beat faster. "What do you mean?" Naledi hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Your father, Thabiso Makona, he was not a poor mechanic." Lorato froze. That was the story she had grown up hearing, that her father used to fix cars in Botswana and died young, leaving nothing behind. "But my mother said." "I know what she said," Naledi interrupted gently. "But she didn't tell you the truth. Your father was one of the founders of Makona Minerals." Lorato's breath caught in her throat. "The mining company. The big one. The $1 billion one," Naledi confirmed with a sad smile. "Your father helped build it from the ground up. He was brilliant, respected, and loved. And he loved you deeply." Lorato shook her head. "No, that can't be true. I grew up with nothing. If he was so rich." Naledi reached out and held her hand. "Your father died suddenly when you were 4. After his death, there were legal issues, shares, and trusts in your name. Your mother was supposed to tell you everything when you were old enough. Then why didn't she?" Lorato whispered, her voice breaking. Naledi's eyes darkened. "Because of Mbwana." Hearing his name sent a cold shiver through her body. "When your mother remarried him," Naledi continued, "he convinced her that keeping the truth quiet was the safest option, but really he wanted control. He didn't want you to know your worth. If you knew the truth, you would have choices, and he couldn't control you or your mother anymore." Lorato felt her stomach twist. All the insults, the chores, the mistreatment, they had treated her like she was worthless on purpose. Naledi squeezed her hand tighter. "Your father's death changed everything, but hiding the truth changed even more. You didn't lose a father who had nothing, you lost a father who left you everything." Tears streamed down Lorato's face. For the first time in her life, she cried not just from pain, but from the shock of discovering a life she had never been allowed to dream of. Naledi pulled her close and whispered, "You were never meant to live the life they forced on you. Your father wanted greatness for you. And now, it's time you finally know who you are." Naledi walked into her study and came back with a thick black folder. She placed it gently on the coffee table in front of Lorato, almost as if it were something fragile or sacred. Lorato wiped her eyes, confused. Naledi looked at her with a serious expression and said, "Everything you need to know is inside this." With shaking fingers, Lerato opened the folder. The first thing she saw was her own birth certificate, clean, official, stamped. Her father's name, Thabiso Makona, was printed clearly beside her mother's. She traced the letters with her thumb, wondering how something so important had been hidden from her for so long. Next, she pulled out another document. Dozens of pages showing numbers she didn't understand at first. Then she saw it clearly. Lerato Makona, beneficiary and owner. Her breath hitched. Naledi leaned forward and explained softly, "These are your father's shares in Makona Minerals. Part of them were placed in your name before he passed." Lerato blinked, trying to make sense of it all. She had been told her father left nothing. But here she was holding proof that he had left her more than she could even imagine. There was more. A trust fund statement with her name printed boldly across the top. Money saved, invested, protected for years. Money that could have changed her entire childhood if she had known. Money that Mbwana made sure she never saw. But the paper that broke her completely was the letter. It was old, slightly yellow at the edges, but her father's handwriting was clear and strong. Naledi encouraged her. "Read it, my child." Lerato unfolded the letter carefully. "My dearest Lerato, if you are reading this, it means I could not stay to watch you grow. But I want you to know this. You are my pride, my joy, and my legacy. When you turn 21, you will inherit 32% of Makona Minerals. This company is your future. You are meant to lead, to shine, to rise. Never let anyone treat you like you are nothing." Lerato pressed the letter to her chest as tears streamed down her face. All her life she had been treated like she was worthless, like she was a burden, like she didn't belong anywhere. But now, with these documents spread in front of her, she finally understood the truth. She wasn't nothing. She was the future majority shareholder of a billion-dollar company. She was the daughter of a man who had believed in her even after death. She was someone powerful, someone important, someone who had been hidden for far too long. Naledi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lerato, your life is about to change. And this time, no one will control your story." Moving to Gaborone with Naledi felt like stepping into a new version of life, one Lerato never knew she could have. The city was bright, busy, full of people who walked like they had somewhere important to be. For the first time, Lerato felt like she was allowed to dream that big too. Naledi wasted no time. "If you're going to inherit a company," she said with a proud smile, "you need to know how to run one." Within a week, Lerato was enrolled in business classes. Finance, leadership, communication, everything she had never imagined she would study. On the first day, she sat in the front row, nervous, unsure if she belonged there. But when the lecturer asked a question and she answered confidently, a small spark lit inside her. Maybe she did belong. Naledi took her shopping for clothes that made her feel powerful. Sharp blazers, clean-cut trousers, beautiful blouses. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lerato barely recognized the girl who once cried while scrubbing floors before school. Her posture changed. She walked straighter. She spoke with calm confidence. People started listening when she talked. Every evening, she and Naledi sat together going through her father's documents, learning about stocks, shares, company policies, and her future role. The more she learned, the more she understood how big her father's name truly was, and how much had been stolen from her. But Lerato kept everything a secret. Her mother didn't know where she was. Mbwana didn't know if she was alive or not. Sometimes she wanted to call her mother to tell her she was safe, to ask her why she stayed with a man who treated them both so badly. But she held back. This was her time to grow, without fear, without control, without guilt. At night, she lay awake thinking about how she used to be treated like nothing. She remembered doing chores until her back hurt, wearing torn uniforms, being laughed at by Kasai and Baraka. And now she was learning to manage billions. The contrast made her emotional, but it also made her stronger. Slowly, she started becoming the woman her father had written about in his letter. Smart, brave, ready. Naledi watched her transformation with pride. "Your father would be smiling," she often said. And Lerato believed it. She was no longer the girl thrown out of a house with a torn backpack. She was building a future, step by step, preparing for the day she would walk into Makona Minerals, not as a scared girl but as an owner. And until that day came, her silence was her power. Her growth was her revenge. Her transformation was her rise. Back in Arusha, life inside Mbwana's house started cracking like a plate dropped on the floor. At first, he acted proud after throwing Lerato out. He told neighbors, "She'll come crawling back. You'll see." He expected her to return in tears, begging for a place to sleep. Or at least, he expected her to send money once hunger humbled her. But days passed, then weeks, then months. No call, no message, no begging, nothing. And the silence drove him crazy. Meanwhile, real problems were growing inside the house. Bills began piling up on the dining table, the same table where he had shouted at Lerato. School fees for Kesai and Baraka were overdue. Electricity bills were ignored for too long. Loan officers kept calling, asking when he planned to pay back the money he borrowed for his small business. His shop wasn't earning the way it used to. Customers complained. Suppliers stopped giving him goods on credit. The debt grew like fire in dry grass. He started snapping at everyone. At his wife for not handling things. Kesai for using too much electricity. At Baraka for asking for transport money. But they all knew the real problem. Lerato was gone, and with her, the free labor and savings he had depended on. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about unpaid fees, Kesai finally exploded. "Baba, this is your fault. Why did you chase the maid away? Now look at us." Baraka jumped in too. "Yeah. At least she used to iron my school uniform. Who's going to do it now? You." "Mama." The word made hit their mother like a slap, but she stayed quiet, the same way she always had. But her silence felt different now, heavier, tired. Mbwana felt cornered. His own children were turning against him. He shouted back, "Do you know how ungrateful that girl was? I was teaching her a lesson." Baraka rolled his eyes. "Well, your lesson is teaching us poverty." The argument turned into shouting, doors slamming, chairs scraping. The house that once pretended to be peaceful was now a battlefield of blame and bitterness. Even the neighbors started whispering. They wondered why Lerato hadn't come home crying, why she wasn't seen walking around looking for a job, why Mbwana seemed more stressed every day. At night, when the house finally got quiet, Mbwana sat alone staring at his phone, waiting for a message that would never come. Deep down, he knew something was different this time. Lerato wasn't coming back, and for the first time he realized, maybe she didn't need him at all. On the morning of her 21st birthday, Lerato woke up earlier than usual. Naledi had laid out a navy blue suit for her, the one they had picked together months before. It was simple, sharp, and powerful. As she buttoned the blazer, Lerato looked in the mirror and barely recognized the girl staring back. This wasn't the terrified teenager who used to sweep floors and sleep with a torn backpack under her pillow. This was a woman stepping into the life her father had prepared for her. Naledi drove her to Makona Minerals headquarters, a tall glass building that seemed to touch the sky. Lerato's heart pounded as they entered the lobby. People in suits moved quickly, talking into phones, holding tablets, making decisions. And yet, when Lerato walked in, something shifted. Eyes followed her. Whispers started. "Who is she?" "That's Naledi Makona with someone. She looks familiar." Lerato took a deep breath and clutched the folder in her hand, the same folder that had changed her life. Security approached with polite curiosity, and when she presented her ID and documents, their eyes widened. They immediately escorted her and Naledi upstairs to the executive boardroom. The room was huge, with a long polished table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Executives sat around the table, confused but attentive. Some of them had worked with her father years ago. Some had only heard stories. But all of them felt something in the air. Lerato placed her folder gently on the table. "My name is Lerato Thabiso Makona," she said, her voice steady. "I am here to claim my inheritance and my rightful position in this company." A silence fell so thick it felt like the room had stopped breathing. An older man at the far end of the table slowly stood up, Mr. Gasitsayo, her father's closest business partner. His eyes softened as he looked at her. "You have your father's eyes," he murmured. Then he walked toward her, opened the folder, and examined the documents one by one: birth certificate, share certificates, trust papers, and finally, the letter from her father. When he finished, he placed the papers down and looked at her with something between pride and relief. "Welcome home, Miss Makona." Those words sent a warm wave through her body. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back with a strong smile. One by one, the executives stood up to greet her. Some shook her hand with respect. Some whispered, "Congratulations." Others simply looked stunned. But in that moment, Lorato realized something powerful. She didn't need validation. She didn't need apology. She didn't need anyone's permission. She was now one of the owners of Makona Minerals, one of the most powerful young women in the region. And her new life had finally begun. Word of Lorato's arrival at Makona Minerals spread faster than fire. By midday, it seemed the whole city knew. The girl who had been thrown out years ago was now one of the owners of a billion-dollar company. And not everyone was thrilled. Bwana got the news from a neighbor who called in excitement and disbelief. At first, he laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. But when he saw pictures online, Lorato in her navy suit, standing confidently in the boardroom, he felt his stomach drop. Panic, shame, and fear tangled in his chest. He grabbed his car keys and raced through Arusha streets, heart pounding, sweat running down his temples. For years, he had imagined Lorato returning broken, begging, or sending money to fix his mistakes. But this was something he couldn't control. By the time he arrived at Makona Minerals headquarters, his hands were shaking and his shirt was soaked through. He burst into the lobby, scanning frantically. There she was, Lorato, calm, poised, surrounded by executives who now recognized her as one of their own. "Lorato!" he shouted, voice cracking. People turned to stare. He took a few steps forward and then dropped to his knees in the middle of the marble floor. His face was pale, sweat dripping down, eyes wide with desperation. "My daughter, please forgive me. I was wrong. I didn't know." Lorato looked at him from across the room. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, and her body strong. Every insult, every chore, every humiliation he had thrown at her years ago flashed before her eyes. The fear, the pain, the nights spent crying alone, they were all there. But she didn't flinch. She stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and stopped a few feet from him. "Mbwana," she said, voice clear, carrying authority he had never earned. "Listen carefully. I was never your daughter." The words hit him harder than any slap could. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, but nothing came out. The lobby was silent. People watched as the man who once shouted at her, who treated her like dirt, now looked small and powerless at her feet. Lorato turned her gaze away, toward the city skyline visible through the glass windows. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need his tears. She had her name, her power, her inheritance, and for the first time in her life she felt completely free. Mbwana stayed on his knees, trembling as Lorato walked away. The girl he had tried to break had become unstoppable, and he finally understood that he had lost more than control. He had lost her forever. After claiming her place at Makona Minerals, Lorato felt a freedom she had never known. She bought a house of her own in Gaborone, a place filled with light, laughter, and peace. No yelling, no doors slammed in her face, no endless chores. Just walls that were hers, a space where she could breathe and dream. But she didn't stop there. She remembered the young girls in Arusha who had few opportunities, who were told they weren't enough, who were overlooked just like she had been. She started sponsoring their education, buying books, uniforms, and school supplies. She made sure they had mentors and safe spaces to learn and grow. Each girl who smiled because of her support reminded her of how far she had come, and how much power there is in being seen, valued, and supported. One night, she typed her story anonymously online. She wrote simply, honestly, "He threw me out like I was nothing, but he bowed when he learned who I really was." She didn't expect it to spread so fast. Within hours, her story had gone viral. Comments poured in from all over Africa. Women, men, young people, all inspired, moved, and sharing their own stories of resilience. Messages of support and admiration flooded her inbox. People called her brave, unstoppable, a symbol of hope. Her mother eventually reached out. The phone rang, and Lorato stared at it. A part of her wanted answers, reconciliation, maybe even a fragile kind of closure. But another part of her remembered the years of silence, neglect, and control. She realized some bridges weren't meant to be crossed. Lorato chose peace. Not revenge. Not anger. Not even sadness. She chose her life, her dignity, her power, her future. She smiled at the girls she was helping, at the home she had built, at the life she had claimed. For the first time, the world saw her not as someone pushed aside, but as someone unstoppable. She had been treated like nothing, but she had risen to everything. And in that rise, she found something no one could ever take from her: freedom.